in this week's Parsha, there was a lot of discussion of the Kohanim. And what my insight basically dealt with was how the Kohanim really functioned in ancient Jewish society. And the many people think of Kohanim, they always think of the temple. And think of Kohanim as the priests in the temple, and that was their job, and so forth and so forth. And that's the way we understand the role in the ancient society and so forth. But when you really think about it, there was only one Beis Hamikdash in one place in the country, in the world. And if you think of how many Kohanim must have existed, how many of them actually ever worked in the Beis Hamikdash? Even with the rotations, they used to have a weekly rotation. I think there were 22 mishmarim. But the fact is groups every week of people who worked in the temple. They had like a different rotation of the Kohanim in the temple.
How many people were in a...
I'm not exactly sure how many were in any group.
How much is it? If you're going to talk about how many were actually involved in the temple, then there should be some notion of...
Yeah, but how many? But how many? If you really think about the temple, we sort of know how much temple space. How many priests could there have been working in the temple? Say 100.
That's the question.
Yeah, but let's say there were 100. I mean, how?
Time or in total?
No, 100 on. Let's say there were 100 people working at a time in the temple, right? Okay. Now, how many? So how many priests? You add them up. So if they keep switching over the 100 every week. So that's, even if, and they didn't switch it, it wasn't a 52-week rotation, so it's 5,000 Kohanim? I mean, how many Kohanim really actually worked in the temple? Really think about it. And then you take all the people who couldn't work in the temple who were still Kohanim, and were still Kohanim. Like the Baal Mum, the disabled Kohen. He still had his right to Truma, he still had his right to, he still had to be careful about Tuma and Tara, even though he could not work in the temple. So it dawned on me, and it's sort of this idea that I threw out into the insight, but I just want to expand upon it, is that, so what really happened in the real world with the Kohanim? And that's a different perspective when you start thinking about the real workings in the real world. So if you think about it, the Kohanim did not have any land. In the agrarian society, it was very major not to have any land. Now, the farmer had to give 2%, generally 2% of his produce, to the Kohanim, because they got Truma. So the Kohanim who had no land received Truma from the agricultural sector. So 2% of the agricultural sector's produce went to the Kohanim, which created a class of people who weren't involved in working the land, but received 2% of the produce of the land, which, if you think about that, was a good percentage of the produce, because the Kohanim made up a percentage of one of the 12 tribes of Israel. So it was a good percentage of stuff they received. So it tells you a certain action of relating. What I find really interesting, though, is how did the farmer distribute the produce to the Kohen? What Kohen got the produce? And the interesting thing, it was totally at the discretion of the farmer. He could give to any Kohen he wants to the extent he wants to. It's a concept called Tovas Hana. It's his right to give his produce to whoever Kohen he wants. So can you imagine the dynamics of this system, where you have a class of individuals in the society who had no land, were not involved in the major industry of the country, right, but had a right to 2% of the produce. The agricultural society could not use their produce until they distributed it to the Kohen or took it out for distribution to the Kohen. And the way it was distributed was at the discretion of the agricultural sector of the community. So what kind of dynamics does that create in that society? And that, to me, was something which I pointed out, that it had to create a relationship between the kahuna and the society that was a much more personal relationship. Well, what's interesting is a lot of hints in the Torah and other places that point to the kahuna and the Levim, but specifically to the Kohanim, as being the judicial sector of the society. It's very interesting. You sit there, you read in the Chumash where it says, you go to the Kohen that exists in that time and ask him the Shiloh. But the bottom line is, there's no statement that says the Kohen had any obligation to become a judge. There's no statement that says the Kohanim were the Rabbanim of the society. There's no statements that say, but all of a sudden there's statements that says the Kohanim were the people who were the judges. But there's no statement that says they had to be that. So what I feel exists over here must be a symbiotic relationship. This class of Kletzer Truma had to fulfill some function for the society in order to get from the society, from the agricultural sector, their Truma, specifically to them. So if one Kohen went off to be a jeweler, or someone said this, or went off to have another profession, or was the builder in the city, guy says, hey, listen, I'm not going to give it to him unless he wants it. He's a friend or whatever it is. But if you have the Kohanim developing in terms of being the judicial area and so forth, and the teachers of the society, then the people who are beneficiaries of the teaching would sit there and say, well, that's the Kohen I'm going to give my Truma to. So it's an interesting development. The reason I'm bringing that up is it shows how you look at Torah differently when you think about the actual mechanics in the real world. How do you take Torah? Most people, when they study things like Truma or Kohen or stuff like that, they don't think of it in terms of the actual movements of society. But if you actually move it, and that is, to me, a significant aspect of how we should be studying Torah. There's theoretical aspects of Torah, and so on and so forth, but bringing Torah into the real world is a different perspective on Torah. And that usually starts with questions that a lot of people usually don't ask. And that's the first question I want to ask tonight. This was a lead-up into the first question asked tonight. The opening question I think you have to ask in terms of Kabbalat HaTorah is, why do we listen to God? Okay? Okay, God commands. So, why do I have to listen to God's command? Why do human beings listen to God's commands? That gets into an idea that good and evil are somehow tied to listening to God's commands. But the bottom line is why do we listen to God's command? Okay? Another human being comes in here and says jump. I'm not necessarily going to jump. So why is it that if God says jump, you feel I should jump? That's got to be the starting point.
Because he was a liberator in some sense?
Okay, so that's specifically in response to his liberation of the Jewish people. So it's only for Jews. Right. It's not for people not liberated. And then I can ask you, so if someone liberates you, why do you have to say jump?
You don't have to, but you might feel some sort of special time.
There's a difference between saying I should versus I have to. It's proper.
Yeah.
Or I want to.
Or I want to. See, this becomes the starting point of any aspect of authority. Okay, you take in terms of parental authority. Why do you listen to parents? Okay? What?
Oxymoron.
Parental authority, right. But the fact is the question is why? Why? And by the way, it's a very interesting thing that develops in terms of the analysis. There are statements within Torah study that basically says, just because a person wanted a kid, right? Why is it? Because parental authority, it's like the classic argument. Well, the parents basically, assisted the child or brought the child up. So there's a concept of keres hatov. But then there's the other concept that the parent wanted the child for themselves. Not, is basically people want to have kids. So the point is like, people who say, I didn't tell you to have me. So therefore, it might be the parent who's more responsible to the child. Say, listen, you're the one who brought me into this world. Take care of me. But the fact is that, but the fact is in terms of starting this analysis, you have to start, when you're going to start about Kabbalat HaTorah, you're going to start about this, is that the basis of the Jewish understanding of the relationship of Torah to God is through mitzvah. And mitzvah is generally understood to be command. There's other people trying to make it nicer and so forth, but the bottom line is the mitzvah's command. Okay? So the point is, this is a starting point. Why do you listen to God's commands? Why do you feel obligated to listen to God's commands? Okay?
He's bigger than me.
Hmm?
He's bigger than me.
That's one possibility. Right? 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 It's like the Bill Cosby line. Right? When he says, Noah, build a fund. Right? And you all know the line, right? No, Bill Cosby says, God says to Noah, I think you need to build an ark. Says, how long can you tread water for? It's like one of the arguments is that he's bigger than you. That argument is that he can hurt you.
Okay, so reward and punishment is.
So basically, that value, that idea of listening to God, that idea is called yirat ha'onish, fear of punishment, and that's considered to be the most insignificant reason to listen to God. It also creates a very difficult concept, because what do you call someone who you listen to because he'll hurt you if you don't listen to him?
Dictator.
Bully, dictator. There was an American philosopher called George Santayana who basically said that God, he didn't believe in God, but he said God is someone you would not want as your next door neighbor. If your only perception of God is that you do it because he'll beat you up, then it creates a very, very difficult definition of God. It becomes a definition of God that basically says, I'm afraid of being hurt. And therefore, what kind of relationship do you have with God? The opening statement of the first paragraph of the Shema, B'ahavta es Hashem Elokecha, shall love God, right? Love me, because otherwise it will hurt you. That doesn't create love, I don't think, right?
What about for a feeling of security? Like you would go back to a parent's house, you would have security and protection from a parent.
So the fact is that
So
you're assuming
you're
assuming a certain relationship with the parent.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why you listen to them, because that's the other side of the reward aspect.
It's not even so much reward.
Yeah.
I see a difference between reward and a feeling of security.
Yeah, because there's a little bit more of a relationship in that.
Yeah.
Okay, the fact is that reward. There are two types of what you would call rewards, and it's something you have to develop. But there is the like in psychology, they have a distinction between work and play. The work is that which you do for an external reinforcement. In other words, I'm playing basketball because I get a paycheck. There's nothing between the playing basketball, between the return is a paycheck. I'm just doing this activity for this external reward, which has nothing to do with the activity whatsoever. Then there's playing basketball because I'm enjoying it. Playing basketball because you enjoy it, that's called play. Because basically you're doing it because of the inherent benefit you get from the action itself. So there's that distinction, and by the way, that distinction has a little bit to do with schar bonus. I had a Rosh Hashiva once pointed out in terms of Pirkei Avos, when Antigonus Yisroel says, don't be mishamish Kosh Baruch Hu amanas kabel pras, in order to get a prize. The way he understood that was, it's pras is an external reward. Your relationship with God should be beneficial because of the very functioning of the relationship. So that's what you're talking about in a certain level of the security inherent in the relationship. But the fact is that makes a very big distinction between external, internal. It also makes a distinction in terms of how we understand God. And that really becomes much of our issue in looking at Kabbalat HaTorah, in the sense that what is our fundamental relationship with God as a commander? Okay, He commands. So what is that relationship that He has in terms of commanding? Okay.
I think what Corinne was trying to say was somebody who is benevolently giving you what is in your best interest. So maybe that's a little bit above the level of reward. So
and that's why I said it's different than reward.
The Yiddish Eibishter, the Father in heaven.
Right. So that creates an understanding of God acting for your benefit. Now that creates another dynamic. You have to have that perception that God is acting in your best interests.
Because if we accept God as the creator, we assume that the rules he set out are the rules that will allow us to derive the most out of the life that he has given us.
Which is a basic assumption in Torah thought, that everything that God does is for our benefit. Which leads to a certain conclusion in terms of our belief system that says that it is for our benefit. But then you have to. Then comes the question of why doesn't he explain it that way? And then comes a question that also raises other issues, such as the Akedah. Okay, and it's something that leads to an issue. If you really believe that whatever God tells you is for your benefit, then what was Avram's test at the Akedah? Okay, it's simple. Hey, God, go tell your son. It might be difficult, but obviously you're telling me what's the best thing for me. So the point is, what's the struggle in that regard? Is the struggle simply because it's very hard to do what's best for me? I know it's best to go to the dentist, but I still don't want to go. Is that the idea, or is there something that's very much part of that issue involved over there? Okay, the fact is that if you take concepts like Mesiras Nefesh, okay, that you do it because you're being Meiser Nefesh, which means you're giving up yourself. Well, theoretically, how could you do anything for God in terms of giving up yourself? Because everything you do is going to be ultimately beneficial. Now, maybe it's because there's a tremendous challenge of faith in that level. To know that this, from all circumstances in front of me, is going to be a challenge, but I have to believe, is the issue that I have to believe is actually for my best. But these are the kind of questions we have to deal with. Yeah.
So the other thing we haven't brought up is the ultimate truth or ultimate sense of justice, and that's why you follow. You follow in the sense that there is a truth in the world. The truth has been presented to you, and you do it because it is a way to reach that ultimate truth.
Yeah. The question is, why are you interested in the ultimate truth? Is that a personal interest?
Personal interest. I think people have an inborn sense of justice and fairness.
It's an interesting. There's certain psychological statements that tie into this, that demand a certain perception of the human being. I think that we have, like, for example, there's an interesting issue in psychology. Okay, you can correct me if you want, but the fact is, there's an interesting issue in psychology. What's wrong with the guy who thinks that he's Napoleon? Or let me put it the other way. I remember when I took abnormal psychology many years ago at York. Okay, my professor was a guy named Graham Reed, who was a really funny guy, and he was telling a story like this. He said basically there was a guy. The way he told the story was that there was a guy who came to him because he thought he was a woman. He wasn't, and he wanted to, and he needed to go to the psychiatrist because he had to face up to the fact that he wasn't a woman, but he really thought he was. So he said, okay. So I asked him, like, why is it that you, like, do you have a problem thinking you're a woman? No, I like thinking I'm a woman. I like being a woman, right? So he says, what's the problem? He says, well, I'll tell you. I like going out to bars, okay, and trying to pick up people, right? And here I am. I go to this bar. There's a bunch of sailors there, and so forth and so forth. And he looks very, very nice as a woman. He says, but when we go wherever we're going that night, right, when they find out that I'm not really built like a woman, they can hurt me. So he says, I'm beginning to understand that thinking I'm a woman could not be advantageous to me. So I'd like to switch. But the interesting thing about this is what always hit me was that the truth didn't matter in terms of psychology. In other words, the way that psychology is the fact that this guy thought he was a woman, both in terms of even him as a psychologist, that wasn't a mental illness. It's only a mental illness if it causes you anxiety or anguish. But if you're happy living a lie, go for it. Doesn't matter. Now, maybe nowadays we wouldn't call it a lie.
I would disagree. A delusion is a mental illness.
I happen to agree with you. I happen to agree with you. The fact is, in psychology today,
it's a symptom case.
Right.
Symptom.
Okay, but the fact is that in psychology today, or what I think psychology, it was an interesting question. If someone believes in Napoleon, but they're happy like that, and they're enjoying their life like that, right? And it's not causing any harm to anyone else, and not causing any harm to themselves. Okay, how is that defined within the mental, within the mental health profession and so forth? Now, the truth is, my perception is, guy's got a problem. Okay, and I agree with you that it's delusional.
But again, it's a symptom. It's not necessarily
right. But the fact is that even though you see it that way, the fact is many people would turn around and say that they're not so committed to the truth. That's all I'm trying to point out. That your assumption that most people want the truth, I happen to be in that world. I happen to be someone who says I want the truth and so forth. But the fact is that most people don't think in that way. And that really has touched upon the realm of religion in general. The new perception of religion. Religion is self-serving. Okay? People don't think about really what you really believe in. Well, this works for me. Well, either this is true or this is not true. Right? But the point is that, no, it works for me, and you have another religion that works for you, because it's basically what makes your life beneficial, and the truth becomes secondary. And that raises another issue. I'm just saying that the fundamental perception that all people want the truth, because we want the truth and we see that as a normal perception of human beings, it may not necessarily be true. That's all I'm saying. So the point is knowledge of God and so forth and so forth. Do people want to know about God because they want the truth? I don't know. But anyways, that's something I want. What I want to deal with is all these issues sort of work within trying to understand the relationship of the Jewish people through HaKadosh Baruch Hu through Har Sinai, okay, and through Sinai. Now there are 3 sections to this. Yeah. Okay.
Hi, Harley.
Okay. There are 3 sections to this area. Okay. I'm just going to point out to you. One is section 2.0, which is called threat. Which starting Gemara is going to be our first Gemara we're going to look at, which is the Gemara of Kofaleim Harkagigas, that God put a mountain over the people.
Rabbi, can I say something?
Yes.
So people that have suffer from like emotional problems, a lot of times they have priorities that are much stronger than finding the truth.
Right.
It's just not an issue for them.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And it's very much so. It's very, the first of all, finding the truth is not so easy, but the fact is that's a reality for many people. They're looking for, and you have it in terms of what they call kiruv and what they call yerida. The fact of the matter is, whether you're, a lot of people think that kiruv is a process of I found the truth, but a lot of times they found a psychological haven for them. Okay, it's something that they find a beneficial lifestyle. You also find this in terms of yerida, which is people leaving the religion. Okay, not because there's a real argument against it. It's just that I don't like it. There's an article in Newsweek magazine in the 1980s, I believe. I think I have somewhere in my boxes or something like that. It was an article about nuns leaving the convent. What happened is the church really came down hard on nuns who were lesbians, and they really came down hard on this practice in the convent. So what happened is many nuns were leaving the church, okay, because there was no outlet for their same-sex interests, whatever it is. So this article was about this. And then came a very interesting question. The author article said he spoke to a lot of the nuns who left the convent and asked them, so what are they now doing for their spirituality? Right? And one said he got into Buddhism, another one said that she found a spiritual fulfillment through the women's movement, all these other arguments. What I found interesting when I read that article was that it didn't say anything about what did you do with your belief, with your previous belief. If you believe in the Catholic Church, which I would assume you would believe in this because you became a nun, what did you now do with your understanding of truth? That was not the question that was asked. The question is asked, what did you do with your spirituality, with your need for spirituality? So that's the psychological aspect of it all, and that's where truth comes an issue. Is it really that you're looking for truth, and so forth? Okay, so the first section was the section of threat, which is Kofaleim Harkagigas, and that's where we're going to start tonight. The second section is 3.0, and it's a little bit further down. It actually begins with item number 17, and that's the concept of Nasa v'Nishma, which is not just saying we will do, but we will do and Nishma, whatever Nishma means. And the final one is the one that speaks about the other nations. Just trying to find it here. Section 3.0, which basically says the other nations, that's 4.0, and says what is the difference between the relationship of God to non-Jews and to Jews. Remember, there's a command from God to non-Jews as well, the 7 Noahide laws. So what is the difference between the command of Torah and the command of 7 Noahide laws? So those are three issues that come down to what is God's relationship to human beings. Okay? So we're going to start with this famous Gemara in Shabbos of Kofaleim Harkagigas. And hopefully what we'll understand is the inherent, it's item number 1. Okay? Back in 2.0. And it's basically, it's a famous Gemara in the Gemara Shabbos, which really somewhat contradictory. Okay? Okay. So it says like this. But Yitzatzu Tachit Chahar. They were congregated underneath the mountain. Now, generally it's understood to mean that they camped around, they congregated beside the mountain, but the actual language is underneath the mountain. So what does that mean? Okay. So Amar Rabbi Avdimi Bar Chama Bar Chasa Melamed Shekafach HaKodesh Baruch Hu Aleim Et HaHar Kegigas. So it teaches that God raised Mount Sinai above them like a barrel, and said to them, Amar Lahem, Imatem Mekabim Es HaTorah Motav. If you accept the Torah, it's good. V'im lav, and if not, Sham Tiek V'raschem. This will be your death. This will be your graves, right? Okay. Now understand the statement over here. Okay. If you don't accept the Torah, now God's raising a mountain over their head and saying, if you accept the Torah, it's good. If you don't accept the Torah, I'm going to drop the mountain and end this whole issue here. Okay, so I'm forcing you to accept the Torah. Right off the bat, you have an inherent problem right here. He's forcing you to accept the Torah. What does that mean? He's not forcing you to do these things. He's forcing you to accept the Torah. It's a very different idea. Because the truth of the matter is, if you look at Torah, there's already responses if you know, there's always consequences if you don't do it, right? If you don't keep kosher, you're going to get lashes. We're not talking about that. We're not talking that God says, listen, keep the Torah or I'm going to punish you. It's saying I'm going to force you, okay, you have to accept the Torah, and I'm forcing you to accept the Torah. God's saying, good, I'm going to force you to accept the Torah. Good, if you do, good. If you don't, I'm going to kill you. Right? Now, what's the inherent problem with that?
The choice?
What?
The choice.
Yeah, it seems like free choice. You have a free choice. You could either die or I mean, free choice doesn't mean that there's no consequences, right? You have free choice. You know, Nathan Hale, when he says, "Give me liberty, or give me death," that's an aspect of free choice. The fact that he's going to die doesn't mean he didn't have free choice. His choice was to die. So the point is that this, but it is somewhat of it's a duress point. I'm forcing you to say yes, right? I'm forcing you to accept.
Acceptance under duress really isn't legal.
But that's exactly the problem. So the problem is, the Gemara that goes on to this says, okay, Am Ravacha Bar Yaakov, Mikan Moda Rabbi Loraita. From this, you have a tremendous challenge to Torah, right? Why? Because a contract that's under duress is not binding. So if I put a gun to your head and say yes, that yes has no standing. Now, the point is, so fine. So what does God need yes for? Why doesn't God just say, okay, don't say yes, just do it? It sounds to be that the yes becomes significant, but if the yes is significant, then I have to say yes. What's the very point of saying yes? Because this yes doesn't count for in any event. In other words, I need you to say yes. I'm putting a gun to your head to get you to say yes, but the very fact that I'm putting a gun to your head means your yes doesn't have any standing as a yes. So it seems to be very strange, right? So that's really underlying it here. It's saying God forced us. If it's true God forced us, it doesn't have any point. You have a challenge to say I don't have to follow Torah anymore. Then why did God even bother doing it? Then the Gemara gives an answer. Okay, Afal Pi came Hador Kablu Rimei Chashverish Diksiv Kimu v'Kibu HaYehudim Kimu Masha Kibu Kvar. In the end, the generation of Achashverosh and the generation of Achashverosh, they accepted it already. Okay? Because we say Kimu v'Kibu, the Jews accepted the Torah at that point in time. Now, there's a couple problems with that. Can anyone think about the answer? That 300 years later, or how many years later, I guess it would be 600 years later, okay? We think that the Bayis Rishon lasted 410 years. And then before Bayis Rishon, there was 20 years before, from Yoshua to Shlomo. So you're talking 600 years. I think around 200 years later. So the fact is that 600 years later, you have, so the Jews accepted it. So, okay, so they accepted the time of Achashverosh. So there are three problems with that answer. Three problems. One problem is?
What happened in between those?
Right. So during those 600 years, there was no contract. Right? Okay, we're going to see who asked that question. Second question is in the time of Achashverosh, wasn't that a certain duress period of the time also? What just happened to Achashverosh? Haman was going to wipe them out. So wasn't there sort of duress? Well, first of all, what's God wiping them out for? Because they weren't bound by the original agreement anyways. And second, that's certain duress also. Okay?
The Kimu and Kibu and Megillah Esther
happens after. So the fact so the point is why isn't that duress? It's a certain whoa, we bit the bullet. I don't want to go through this again. So if I don't follow this, God's going to be tough. Why isn't that a new duress? Right? Okay? Okay? And okay, so I said 600 years and then Kibu. I said there was a third one that's bothering me, but I forget what it is now. Okay. Anyways. Okay. So that's one statement that seems to say that seems to say what is this Kibu?
And I guess the last question is Kimu Mashakibu.
Yeah, that was the actual third question. The point is, so when is Kabbalat HaTorah? what is the Kabbalat HaTorah of Shavuos? What was the Kabbalah? They kept what they already accepted. So that means the real acceptance is back on Shavuos, but we just told the acceptance on Shavuos doesn't count anyways. Right? Okay. So, now we're going to go into a different definition. Okay? A different issue here. Amar Chizkiah. My dechsiv mishamayim chishma din eretz yira v'shakata. Okay, so it says over here. Okay, and the English is there's it says zotas cause sentence to be heard. The ear is the key words here is eretz yira v'shakata. The earth was afraid and then became quiet. Okay. Im yira lama shakata. If they were afraid, why were they tranquil? V'im shakata lama yira. And if they were tranquil, why were they afraid? El betchili yira u'v'sof shakata. In the beginning they were afraid, in the end they were tranquil. Lama yira. Why were they afraid? For the Reish Lakish. Now this is not the Jewish people. This is the world. Okay, the Amar Reish Lakish. Might see here v'boker yom hashishi. Why does it say that will be the night and the evening and the morning of the sixth day? Why do you have this special hey of the? Malamid shehizna kosh baruch hu imayse b'reishit, to tell us that God made a condition in the creation of the world. V'amar lahem, and said to the world. Okay, obviously it's sort of the world here means creation or whatever. It's sort of what do you call it? Allegorical in a certain way. But the point here, Im Yisrael makabel Torah atem mekayim. If Israel accepts the Torah, the world will exist. In love, but if Israel doesn't accept the Torah, ani machzir etchem l'tov v'vod, I will return you to nothingness. So the existence of the world is now dependent upon the Jews accepting the Torah at Har Sinai. But the difference in the second part of Chizkiah is not in the actual condition of the acceptance. It's actually being said to the world. But it's also an issue in the acceptance as well. But it gives an idea that the world is dependent upon the Jews accepting the Torah at Har Sinai. So it's a different type of idea here. It seems to be that inherent in reality is the need for the Jews to accept the Torah at Har Sinai, while the first statement seems to say that God created a sort of external pressure for them to accept the Torah. It was almost on one hand there was a built-in pressure to accept the Torah. Existence won't continue if you don't accept the Torah. But on the other hand, there was this external pressure from the mountain. The point is, it seems to be that either way, this acceptance was under duress. So what is this type of acceptance? Now, it really starts, okay, the fact is that it really starts just in terms of question. I'm going to have you skip over to item number 7. Okay, just to say that the question you've asked, or Jeff asked, what about the intervening years? That's the question of the Ramban and the Ritva. Okay? Right there in the beginning of the Ramban, he says, Hadam reading be'inyan agada hamoda rabbi l'oraisa. This statement in this agadata that there's a great challenge for oraisa. Mataretz kvar kiblu b'mei Achashverosh, and it was accepted in the time of Achashverosh. Kashuli, I have a question. Okay? What help is there? What consequence is it that there was a subsequent acceptance years later? In Konem Achashverosh Lahayim Etzavan. If before Achashverosh they weren't commanded, Lama Nanshan, how could they be punished? Churban Bayis Rishon happened before Achashverosh. Why were they punished? Okay? Then he says something very interesting here. Being Nemar, Be'im Nemar B'nei Sha'avru Al-Zeres Malkam, and if you say because they violated the edict of the king, batel modazu, then there's no challenge to this Kabbalah. Okay, so what the Ramban is doing here is introducing, basically saying that we're being introduced to two reasons we listen to God. One is Zeres HaMelech, king. He is the authority. He's the political authority. He can back it up because he's got the power to back it up. But from a legal perspective, this earth is considered to be God's kingdom. Right? If you don't like the laws of Canada, leave. You don't like the laws of the universe, leave. Oh, nowhere to go, too bad. The fact is, God as creator also established himself as king. Now, there's an interesting aspect of what makes God king, because he's a creator. It's an interesting aspect in terms of any parent. As a parent, because he brings a life into the world, does that parent then have absolute dominion over the child to tell him what to do? Well, in ancient Rome, that was true. If a father wanted to kill his son later in life, he had the absolute right to. Right? That seems shocking to you. Mm-hmm. That seemed to be a right in Rome. Because you created them, therefore you had actually dominion over...
I brought you into this world, I can take you out of it.
Right. That's exactly it. But the fact is that in modern society, right, even with the idea of parental authority, there's a limit on parental authority, that the child is a separate being. You don't have a right over it. It's very interesting, this aspect over here, because I'll tell you, I was just reading some articles about vaccinations in halacha, whether there's a halachic obligation to vaccinate if society says that you have to vaccinate. And one of the interesting things is the question then was, do you have a right to not vaccinate a child? And an interesting question becomes, the person who says, I don't want to vaccinate for religious reasons. So the argument of the courts is you have freedom of religion to do whatever you want. You don't have freedom of religion to impose your religious beliefs upon your child. Right? Which is also the argument against the witnesses in terms of blood transfusion. Right? So the point is a limitation of saying that God is king because he is the creator. The other argument for why God is king is because he's a sustainer. We don't exist just because God created us. We exist because God continues to sustain us. We exist because of God maintaining the energy of our existence. That's the different, like you have a light on over here. The question is, what's the cause of this light? Well, you can sit there and say, the cause of the light is looking at what created the lamp. The other argument, the cause of the light is because there's hydroelectricity flowing through the current. Okay, so the point is this is a classic question, and you really see this in terms of Aristotle. Aristotle, who believed in the eternity of the universe, still had an idea of first cause. He wasn't talking about the historical cause, he was talking about the cause today. What caused this light to burn right now? Hydroelectricity, electricity running through it. So what causes us to exist right now? God. And in legal terms, that makes God king, having authority over our world. And therefore, he is king. So that's Zeres HaMelech. But if God is telling us to be king, God commands us in Torah because of king, then we don't need acceptance. He's king. It's Zeres HaMelech. God, listen to what the king tells you. There's no Modah Rabbah. There's no challenge to that. That's king. Once you're saying there's Modah Rabbah, then you're saying it's contractual. God wants us to accept it. Now, God wants us to accept it, okay, why is he forcing us? But the Ramban doesn't ask that. He says, well, if it's an aspect of acceptance, then what does it matter if it's been accepted 600 years later? Okay? Okay. So that's just, okay? Okay, so that's just something.
But what happened 600 years later? Was there some type of statement saying that?
The argument is the Jews re-accepted the Torah. Okay. They recommitted to it. They had
They
a sort of...
recommitted without any threat, per se.
Right. Okay? Okay?
How did that come about?
What?
How did the recommitment come about? Was
It was...
no homeowner who's not involved?
Yeah, it was after the whole thing, and they were so happy to be saved, they basically said, we're recommitting to this. And the question is, was it a little bit of duress and so forth? But the truth is, this is part of the issue. What is that recommitting? What is the nature of that recommitting? Okay? Okay.
Okay, wait. Why would I recommit? There's no some pressure or something. What would a person that I gained by recommitting continue on status quo?
That's a good question. The fact of the matter is that for all intents and purposes, the fact is that things seem to act normally. They were being punished, they're being rewarded. Seems to be, so what is this new recommitment? And what is the aspect of the relationship? In other words, the way I'm going to look at this, okay? The fact is that the way I'm going to look at it is that well, let's read a little bit more in the Ramban, okay? That's exactly what he's going to say. He says not only that, why do we even need this contractual relationship? Okay? Because the fact is, there's a melech anyways. The king said to do it, right?
Yep.
Okay. So he's saying, the Ramban says, nearly lomar, demitchila apal pi shehaya lehem moda, okay, mikol makom lo natan lehem haaretz. So now he's going to deal with the punishment thing. Okay, he says, let's face it. The truth is, even with the moda rabbah, okay, so they weren't bound to the contract, but there were still contractual items in play. They didn't get the land yet. Ela kadesha kaimu Torah. The reason they were given the land is in order to keep the Torah. See, Yitelahem Artzos Goyim Amal Omim Yoshu Abur Yishmur Chukim Chukav B'Torasav Yitzoro Vehem Atzum Mitchila Lo Akru B'Davar Klal. They didn't have any challenge to that. They didn't sit there and say, "Listen, we don't want to be part of the contract." They still went into the land. Right? So he says, they didn't raise up this objection. Ella, they actually still went in. They still went into the land. They said, not true. Okay, so he says, so the fact is they still went into the land. They said, okay, we have a contract. They were being forced out of the contract. So they said afterwards, the contract doesn't apply because we were forced to the contract. They went along with the contract. They still went along with it. Okay? And they benefited. They went into, they conquered the land. So what exactly, so what really happens? It says, Kabbalat HaTorah, what was real punishment when they violated the Torah? Okay? Abed v'Hecht v'min. Okay? They were kicked out of the land. Shago Masra Modal Davar. See, it says that's what they're challenging. You shouldn't kick us out because we never agreed to the contract in the first place. We never agreed to this part. Okay, so he said that with them. Okay, so basically what the Rabbi is saying, yeah, but I never promised you the land for other reasons. So there's actually a contractual. There was a contract. Okay, you forced it to do the contract, but then the Jews acted in line with the contract. They didn't sit there and say, we don't have any contract anymore. They said, okay, here's our contract. We do A, you do B. Okay, you're taking us to the land, we'll follow Torah. Then all of a sudden, they didn't follow Torah anymore. So basically, when they stopped following, they said Torah, so God says, okay, so you don't have a right to the land. So you don't have the right to the land anymore. Okay, so they sit there and say, oh wait, you can't punish us by kicking us out of the land. Wait a second. You don't want the contract? There's no contract. You don't get the land anyways. The land, being kicked out of the land is not a punishment. Being kicked out of the land is just part of the contract. If you don't want the contract, you don't get the contract. That's the way Ramban basically answers this issue. Okay? So basically, but the fact is, is what I think he's actually also doing. The truth is that what we see in terms of punishment, there was still a contractual relationship happening between the Jews and God in practice, even though there wasn't the legal, quote-unquote, legal contractual relationship. So the point is, the practical was still happening. So there was, you do A, we'll do B. Which, by the way, many people don't recognize in terms of Eretz Yisrael, that there's two aspects of the giving to land to the Jewish people. Rav Kook points this out. He says there's two giving to the land of Israel. The giving of the land to Avram Avinu was without any conditions. The land's a Jewish land, period. But the use of the land, the Jewish use of the land, is dependent upon the Jews following Torah. That's why they can be kicked out of the land, right, and therefore not have use of the land. It's still the Jewish land. So Rav Kook argued in Gullus, this is one of the reasons the land was all desolate for those 2,000 years and so forth and so forth, is that it's the Jewish land. It's always the Jewish land. What happens is that the Jews only have the right to the land when they're following Torah. So all the Ramban is pointing out over here is that's a contractual relationship. But the fact is, it's almost like a de facto contractual relationship that existed between the Jews and God in the 600 years between Har Sinai and Purim. Okay, with other problems. And the fact of the matter is why the whole thing, the way they were punished when they were already in Purim, already in Gullus and stuff like that, those are all problems. But the Ramban is saying there was a contractual relationship that existed de facto between the Jews and God during the 600 years. There's a legal relationship that is what we were supposed to accept in accepting the Torah. But there's also, and this is the key point over here, there's also another reality to God commanding. And that's Gzeres HaMelech. That He gives orders. Okay? So the truth is that God's relationship, or the way I understand what happened with Koifel and Harkaviyas, is God was really doing both. Okay? God was really saying, on one hand, I want you to accept the Torah. On the other hand, recognize that I am also king. And I can make you do this without acceptance. And the fact is, in the Jewish mind, might be both concepts. Okay? The fact is that you do it because God orders you because He's king, and you do it because you have a contractual relationship with Him. And the contractual relationship is de facto. You do this, and there's a de facto relationship, and it's also de jure. There's a legal relationship that we accepted at Har Sinai. Okay? Okay, now, okay. If you look over in the Ritva, number 8, okay, the Ritva will say that there actually were okay, the fact is the Ritva is going to point out that there are actually other acceptances, other britu, that even at the time there were other acceptances outside of Sinai. We have other statements of a Brit. And he points out, he says, for the mashma, the Arvas Mov, bo b'Brit's Torah, mitzvos. There was another covenant formed in Moab, in the land of Moab before they went into Eretz Yisrael. Okay? Okay, succeed Ela Divrei Brit. These are the words of the covenant, of the relationship. Okay? Okay, so he says that really, if they could have challenged everything, they could have challenged it there and so forth. Okay? So he says, V'yesh Lomar, if you look at about 2, 4, 6, 8 lines, 7 lines down, Tahim Vadai Midata Kiblu Torah. Almanas Shianchil Haaretz. They for sure accepted the Torah in order to get the land. There sure was an acceptance of the Torah in order to get the land. He's now making, the fact is, the Jews understood this aspect of the contract. Okay? And the fact is, he's really extending upon the ideas of the Ramban. Yeah, they were being forced at Har Sinai, but later on they did have these aspects of connection. Okay? Because you see, Vateitlem Archus Goyim, because they got the land. Okay? Okay? So, okay, and this is really what he's saying. He's saying that this is the other side to it. And this is really going to lead into the other Gemara. Okay? Says this is really what they were understanding. They understood that this contractual relationship was based upon having the land. In other words, Shamti et Kuraskim does not mean I'm going to kill you now. It's basically saying, this is the deal. Accept it, you get the land. You don't accept it, right? You're going to stay here in the desert. It's contractual. It's actually part of the contract. Okay, and that's really why they were kicked out of the land in terms of the punishment. They were kicked out of the land. What's now coming out from the
I just want to rephrase that point in case people didn't get it. Your grave is going to be there doesn't mean he's going to kill you under the mountain. It means that you're not going to inherit the land. You're going to have
right.
graves in the desert.
Right.
You're just not going to inherit the land.
So now
it doesn't mean if you don't accept Torah, I'm going to kill you.
Right.
It means if you don't accept
right.
Torah,
so
you don't go into the land. Your graves will not be in
right.
the land. Your graves
Right.
will be.
This is where you're going to
right.
stay.
And
you're telling me there were grave consequences.
Right. But that's part of any contract. When you enter into any contract, this is the deal. You want the land, this is the deal. So now we understand a little bit more about Purim. What Purim becomes. It becomes the extension of the contract outside of the land, because Purim is the holiday of the Gullus, of the maintaining of spirituality in the Gullus.
What? Oh.
Purim is the holiday of the maintaining of spirituality in the exile. Right? Okay. So if you jump ahead, okay? Okay. The truth is I'm going to run to Purim, then I'm going back to the Pnei Yeshua. But if you go ahead to Purim, the fact is that that's really what Purim is about. And if you look at item number 15, I'm just going to jump ahead. There's a lot, actually, if you look at item, I'm just going to jump ahead a little bit to item 14 or 15. But 14, if you look at what is Purim about, Israel's preservation in the Gullus. Purim is about Israel's preservation in the Gullus. So Purim becomes an extension of the contract outside the land. Okay? It's not just simply, okay, here's the deal. The deal is for land. We get the land of Israel, you got to keep Torah. You don't follow, you don't keep the Torah, you don't get the land of Israel. So now you're not keeping the Torah, you're out there in exile. Fine. But the fact is when it says the Jews re-accepted the Torah at Purim, it was understanding that it's not simply because of the land. It's a contractual relationship between God and the Jewish people in terms of forming a symbiotic state between the two of them. That's not just about, we don't just keep Torah in order to get the land. Okay? We keep Torah, right, because we're in a contractual relationship with God's people, which is not totally connected to the land. Not totally bound by, not totally an issue of the land. It's an issue of, an issue beyond the land. What I'm really leading up to is the contractual relationship is different than the concept of authority, ordering. God tells you to jump. Basically, He's God. Jump. He's king. I better jump. There's consequences if I don't jump, but my reason is jumping has nothing to do with my will seeing any value in jumping. Okay? Once it's contractual, I have to have a perception of some reason I'm going to agree to jump. It's got to be something where, okay, I'm jumping because I see some benefit in jumping. So what's being presented is in terms of Modara, the first statement was what the Ramban and the Ritva are developing is a relationship vis-a-vis the land. Jews want Eretz Yisrael, God said you got to keep Torah to get Eretz Yisrael. So that's a relationship. Okay? Now, the fact is, it's very, very concrete. It's very concrete. And it seems to be nothing to do with the actual, desire itself of Eretz Yisrael. Like, okay, I got to keep Torah in order to get it, but it doesn't seem to be, it seems to be somewhat external. But the point is that I'll agree to it because you're forcing me to agree to it. But the fact is contractual because I see a benefit in it that I'm getting a land. And I got to keep doing this in order to keep the land. What happens at Purim is an extension of the idea that the Jews make the decision that they want to do this. It no longer is an external statement from the authority figures say doing this. It is a statement that says, hey, this is something that I want to agree to. Okay? For whatever reason, they were saved after Haman or so forth and so forth. It's something I want to agree to. And it's not tied to the specific definitions of the land, which is very, very concrete and very tit for tat. It seems to be that I understand that this is something I should want to do. Kimu v'kibu, they kept what they already accepted. They understood that this is beneficial to me to do this. It's in my best interest to accept this idea, and it's not tied to a concrete statement of land. It's tied to the general perception that this is something worthwhile. So what we're really seeing here is this. From a start, when I talk about this idea of putting a mountain over them, we have an idea of duress, but we also have an idea of God is the authority figure. That's basically what we're going to go further into in terms of Naasev and Ishma. The fact is God is the authority figure. He says jump, you jump. That's his right as king to say jump. And you, legally, in this world called the universe, have a legal responsibility to respond to the Zeres HaMelech, the orders of the king. Then comes the idea that God gave this order, and then the point is that idea of doing it because it's an order from the king wasn't enough. And that's the challenge over here of Kibbutz. That God wanted them to accept it. In God wanting to accept it, they had to see some benefit themselves in doing this. It had to come from their own will. It couldn't just come from the imposed will of God, it had to come from their own will. But the fact is the way it started is with this mountain over them, which seems to imply that in that acceptance of their own will, you can't ignore the fact that God is still the king. So there's a shift in the moving here. If you just sit there and say, God made, let's have a contract, without any imposition, then the idea of God as king becomes totally ignored. So God as king is still there because he does raise the mountain above them. And he does give them Gary contract ideas of what they'll see in this contract, namely the land. But eventually, from following the contractual relationship, understanding its dynamics in terms of the land, they get to a point where they're able to make the acceptance of Torah beyond the land to an idea of saying, I want to do it. But what we're seeing here is a dynamic of two dynamics in the relationship with God. One is God as authority, and one is God as wanting you to come to this realization yourself that it's in your interest to make this contractual relationship with God. And that's really the dynamics here, both at the same time. On one hand, God is king. If we ignore the fact that God commands us, we ignore the idea that there is an authority figure in terms of our relationship with God. On the other hand, if we only respond to God as authority figure, then there's a challenge to our own wills. It doesn't become the fact that we are accepting it, which means we understand that we want to do this. So there was this 600-year period where God introduced this concept of accepting at Har Sinai, tied it into a de facto contract based upon the land, which was very understandable to people. Yeah, we want the land, but eventually able to understand the development of this will in the people, so that at Purim, 600 years later, they can accept it even though they're not in the land anymore. We're not accepting it, the contract, because of the land. The land is only one part of the contract. There is something here of why I want to listen to God, why I want to be in this contractual relationship with God. All the Ramban and the Ritva do is show that it was a de facto contract in very concrete terms on the land, but that's not the essential contract. Our Kabbalat HaTorah is not limited, that way we'll get the land. Our observance of Torah must exist outside the land, so what are we getting from it? Why do we need to accept it? And that's something that says it has to be not just simply because God tells us to do it, but because we want to do it. We see some benefit in doing this. We see something in our interest in doing it, which somehow has to connect to God still being the authority figure. So what we're seeing is these dynamics that are existing in terms of our relationship with God. God is still the authority figure, He's still the king. On the other hand, we can't just relate to Him from king. King is too dominant for us, too domineering for us. In order for us to have some type of expression, we have to have some statement that it's our decision to do this. And that really is going to come, and this is where we'll start in a few weeks. That's really going to come from Nasa v'Nishma. Okay? Because the thing about Nasa v'Nishma is most people think that the whole thing of Torah is you do it even though you don't understand it. Right? Right? I'm doing it because I don't understand it, and that's why I do it, because God told me. The fact is, there's a value in that, but there's also a limitation in that value. Okay? So now we're thinking in terms of a few. Okay, so in a few weeks we're going to take up Nasa v'Nishma. Okay? Okay, so let me just point out one thing to you. Okay, and this will be my final point. This is something to think about. I've mentioned this to you guys, I think, before, but I'll mention it again. There are two aspects to the human command from God. One is to be an Aved Hashem. One is to be a servant of God. The other one is to emulate Him. A servant is one who does not have a will of their own. A slave. The slave's will is the master's will. Right? Whatever the master says to do, the slave does. That's one. That's what a slave does. A slave has no will of his own. God is the essence of will. We say God and His will are one. If we're supposed to emulate God, then we have to develop our own wills. And those two demands upon us, to on one hand be servants of God, which basically says our will is God's will, or sublimate our will to God's will, is one side. On the other hand, to emulate God seems to imply that our will is supposed to be developed and try to emulate God, who is His will. He is His will. So the point is, that's a challenge that we always have. Okay? And that's something that we're beginning to see in the Kabbalat HaTorah movement there. On one hand, there is the Koifleim Harkagigas, which seems to imply the Gzeres HaMelech, a real strong statement where God's saying, do this or else, with very concrete contractual relationship, perhaps, based upon the land, to the idea that there's supposed to be some aspect of the will of the human being saying, I want to do this, I'm going to agree to this.